Welcome to Revenge Stories. I stared at my phone, my fingers numb as the video played on repeat. My uncle's message had been short. You needed to see this. But the impact was like a wrecking ball against my ribs. There they were. My family. My mother, my father, my brother Thomas, all sitting around the old wooden kitchen table in Phoenix. The same table where we'd once celebrated birthdays and Christmas dinners. Sunlight streamed through the window, bathing everything in a golden glow that now felt like a cruel joke. The warmth in that kitchen was a lie. I don't know why she acts like she's doing us some huge favor, my mother scoffed, swirling her wine glass lazily. She owes us. After everything we've done for her, paying the mortgage is the least she can do. I barely registered the sound of my own breathing. The words were knives, dull at first, then razor sharp as they twisted deeper. Thomas chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Yeah, it's like she thinks she's some kind of saint. Meanwhile, she's barely helping. Barely helping. For 4 years, I had been covering the bulk of their mortgage payments. 4 years. I had structured the arrangement through my LLC Divine Investments, ensuring they still felt like they were making payments to a bank. They never even bothered to read the fine print. Every month, they sent in their small contribution, and I quietly covered the rest. Over $200,000 poured into that house. My house. And they had the audacity to call me a burden. But the worst part wasn't my mother's sneer. It wasn't my brother's smugness. It was my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had once pulled me onto his lap to help me with my math homework, nodding along in quiet agreement. Not defending me, not stopping them, just agreeing. The video was shaky, recorded without their knowledge, but their voices were crystal clear. My uncle must have filmed it secretly, and I knew why. He had warned me before, but I had refused to see it. They don't deserve your kindness, Lindsay, he had said. One day, you'll understand. I understood now. A slow breath filled my lungs as I clicked out of the video and opened my laptop. My financial records sat neatly in a folder, rows and rows of payments lined up in black and white. I traced my finger down the numbers, my chest hollowing out with each line I skimmed. $267,843. That was the total sum I had spent to keep them comfortable, to keep their precious home intact. Meanwhile, their contributions? $52,500. They were nothing without me. I should have felt rage. I should have wanted to scream, to drive over there and throw the truth in their faces. But instead, an eerie calm settled over me, curling around my bones like something inevitable. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to fight. I had something far better. I clicked open the mortgage agreement and scrolled to the clause my financial advisor had insisted. We include the purchase option clause. My lips curled as I reread it, remembering her words, just in case she had known. Somehow she had known. The next payment was due in 2 weeks. And for the first time, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I picked up my phone and texted my uncle. Thank you for showing me the truth. Don't worry, I won't let them know you sent this. But things are about to change. They thought I was their safety net, that no matter what they said, no matter how little they appreciated me, I would always be there to catch them. They were wrong. Dinner on Sunday was an exercise in self-control. I arrived exactly at 6, the setting sun casting long shadows over the driveway of Mommy House. The moment I stepped inside, my mother greeted me with an artificial warmth, pulling me into a carefully orchestrated hug. The scent of lasagna filled the air, her signature manipulation tactic. Remind her of home. Make her feel guilty. Make her feel obligated. I smiled, playing my role. For now, sweetheart, she crooned, we need to talk about something important. I sat at the table, placing my hands neatly in my lap. Of course, I said, my voice honey smooth. What's on your mind? Thomas cleared his throat. Ever the self-important businessman despite running my father's real estate company into the ground. Well, he began, shooting our parents a glance. Dad's business is struggling, and the mortgage has been a bit of a burden lately. Ah, there it was, the real reason for the invitation. My father sighed, feigning weariness. We were hoping you could help a little more with the payments. My mother nodded quickly, squeezing my hand like she was bestowing a great honor. Just an extra 2,000 a month. It's not much, considering how well you're doing. 2,000. On top of the $5,400 I was already paying. I took a slow bite of lasagna, savoring the taste. The performance was exquisite. The desperation, the veiled demands Oscar-worthy, really. I'll think about it, I said finally, voice neutral. Thomas scoffed. Come on, Lindsay. You barely contribute as it is. I nearly laughed. If he only knew, I placed my fork down and smiled. You're right, Thomas. Sometimes we all get exactly what we deserve. He frowned, confused, but I just kept smiling. 8 days. That's how long it would take for their next mortgage payment to fail. And they had no idea that I wouldn't be there to catch them when they fell. The countdown had begun. For the next 8 days, I played my part flawlessly, responding to my mother's texts with light-hearted emojis, engaging in meaningless small talk with Thomas, nodding at my father's quiet authority like I still respected it. They had no idea that their world was about to collapse beneath them. On the outside, I was the same Lindsay they had always known, the one who swallowed every insult, the one who was so desperate for approval she paid for it in silence. But on the inside, I was something else entirely, calculating, cold, ready. The final mortgage payment deadline loomed like a silent executioner, and I watched the days slip through my fingers with a strange kind of satisfaction. I envisioned their reactions as the notice arrived, the confusion, the slow building panic, the rage when they realized that their burden had been the only thing standing between them and ruin. I imagined my mother, standing in the kitchen with her ever-present glass of wine, reading the letter over and over again, waiting for reality to change. I pictured my father, the man who had taught me to be responsible, the man who had raised me to believe that family came first, fumbling for answers he wouldn't find. And Thomas. Oh, Thomas. He would be livid, pacing, cursing, blaming everyone but himself. I let the thought warm me in a way their approval never had. On the morning of the 9th day, my phone rang at exactly 9:12 am. Right on schedule. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom. Her voice was high-pitched, an octave away from hysteria. Lindsay, something's wrong with the mortgage. The bank sent a notice, something about defaulting. I clicked my tongue, feigning concern. That's odd. They said the payment didn't go through. That's impossible, we've always paid on time. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a slow, satisfied breath before delivering the final blow. Mom, I said, my voice honey-sweet, Divine Investments isn't a bank. A pause. Just long enough for realization to bloom. What? I own Divine Investments. The mortgage wasn't through a bank, it was through me. Silence. Then a strangled, breathless whisper. You? Me? I spun my chair toward the window, watching the Phoenix skyline stretch beyond the glass. I've been paying the majority of your mortgage for the last 4 years. You never even noticed. You're lying. But the tremble in her voice betrayed her. You wouldn't. I cut her off. Oh, I would. And I did. A clatter sounded on the other end. I imagined her scrambling for the notice, rereading every word with new eyes. The truth wasn't just a slap, it was a wrecking ball. Then came the inevitable rage. How dare you? She spat, all pretense of warmth gone. After everything we've done for you, I laughed. A short, bitter sound. Everything you've done for me? I've been keeping you in that house. I've been paying for your lifestyle while you sat around calling me a worthless burden. You think Ow. You? The rage shifted, became something uglier, more desperate. Lindsay, she tried again, her voice softening, morphing into that familiar manipulative lilt. We're family. You wouldn't do this to your own family. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. You taught me that family always comes first, Mom. You just never specified which family. I hung up. The next call came from my father. I let it go to voicemail, then Thomas. Declined. I let them stew in their panic. Let them pace and yell and scramble for a solution that didn't exist. By noon, the texts started rolling in. Dad, we need to talk. Immediately. Thomas, what the hell is wrong with you? Fix this, Mom. "You're destroying this family. I hope you can live with yourself." I didn't reply. I let them scream into the void, drowning in the same silence I had endured for years. And then, just as I had anticipated, came the final act, the last pathetic attempt to regain control. At 6:45 p.m., my phone pinged with a message from an unknown number. "HR at your company might be interested in what we have to say. It would be a shame if they learned about your questionable ethics." I stared at the words, a slow grin spreading across my lips. "Oh, you predictable little parasites. They thought they could blackmail me, threaten my career, take away something I had built for myself, just because they had lost what I had been handing to them on a silver platter." I opened my email, attached the evidence my uncle had gathered, the group chat screenshots, the video, the threats, and sent them to my company's HR department with a simple note. "In case my family reaches out with accusations, here is the full context of the situation. Thank you for your time." I pictured my mother dialing HR with trembling hands, spinning a web of lies, only to be met with a cool corporate response. "We're already aware. Thank you." By the time the eviction notice was officially served 3 days later, I had already changed my number. By the time they realized they had lost everything, I was already gone. And by the time they understood that I had never needed them, never owed them, they were standing outside the home they once called theirs, watching someone else move in. They had spent years treating me like a safety net. They should have learned to fall. The silence after the storm was intoxicating. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't lighting up with their demands. No guilt-ridden messages, no passive-aggressive digs, no veiled threats masquerading as family concern, just peace. A quiet so thick, so absolute, it almost felt foreign. I didn't regret what I had done. If anything, I regretted not doing it sooner. Still, a small, bitter part of me wondered how long it would take before they found a way to sink their claws into someone else. Because people like them, they never change. They never learn. They just find new hosts, new lifelines, new victims to leech from. And I had no intention of letting that happen. It was time to burn the bridge down completely. 3 weeks had passed since the eviction notice. I hadn't heard a single word from them directly, but I knew better than to assume they had given up. My uncle Jason kept me updated. He had always been the black sheep of the family, the one who saw them for what they really were. When the news hit that they had lost the house, he told me Thomas nearly tore the place apart in his rage. My mother cried, not because of the loss, but because of the humiliation. And my father? He just sat there in stunned silence, as if he still couldn't comprehend how their worthless burden had outplayed them so completely. They had moved into a cramped apartment on the other side of town, forced to downsize in ways they had never imagined. No more lavish furniture, no more designer clothes, no more pretending they were better than everyone else. Jason said Thomas had started drinking more. My father barely left the apartment, and my mother had resorted to calling distant relatives, weaving stories of how her ungrateful daughter had ruined them. But no one was buying it. Not anymore. Their influence was crumbling, their carefully constructed lies unraveling. And yet, they still had one final, desperate move to play. I was at work when I received the email. Subject: Lindsay Thompson, internal review request. I stared at the screen, my pulse steady, but my fingers tightening around the mouse. I knew what this was. HR had already received my preemptive documentation, but that didn't mean my family wouldn't try. I clicked the email open, reading the polite but firm request to meet with our HR director regarding an anonymous concern about my conduct. The wording was vague, intentionally so, but I knew exactly who was behind it. "So, this is how you want to play it, huh?" I didn't panic. I didn't fume. I simply gathered my evidence, walked into that meeting, and laid it all out in black and white. Emails, screenshots, a full report on their threats, their lies, their attempts to manipulate me. And finally, the HR representative nodded, closing the folder in front of her. "This is more thorough than I expected." She met my gaze with something resembling respect. "It's clear this is a personal vendetta. We won't be taking any action against you. In fact, we'll be adding a block to any further communications from these individuals." She leaned back in her chair, exhaling. I have to say, Lindsay, most people wouldn't have seen this coming. I allowed myself a small, sharp smile. That's because most people underestimate just how desperate parasites can be when they're starving. By the time I left the office that evening, I had already made my decision. They had tried to take my home. They had tried to take my money. And when that failed, they had tried to take my career. They wanted war? Fine. I was going to give them one. I called Jason that night. How much would you say Thomas values his little real estate empire? Jason laughed. Oh, he lives for that damn company. It's all he has left. Good, because he was about to lose that too. It didn't take long to find what I needed. Thomas had always been reckless, always too sure of himself. A few discreet inquiries, a few phone calls, and suddenly I had access to financial records that should not have been as easy to obtain as they were. Fraud, embezzlement, tax discrepancies, all sitting there waiting for someone to notice. I wasn't that someone, but the authorities? They would be. I sent the anonymous tip on a Friday evening, just before heading out for drinks with Jason. By Monday morning, my brother's office was swarming with auditors. By Wednesday, an arrest warrant had been issued. By the end of the month, his company was in ruins. And as I watched the news report, sipping my coffee with the morning sunlight filtering through my apartment window, I thought about all the times Thomas had looked down on me, dismissed me, undermined me. I wondered how it felt to be the one drowning now. The final blow came a week later. A voicemail. From my mother. Her voice was raw, stripped of all the arrogance, all the self-importance. How could you do this to us? She whispered, and I could hear the exhaustion, the absolute defeat in her words. You were supposed to help your family, Lindsay. We raised you. We gave you everything. And now we have nothing, she sobbed once, then cut the call. I deleted the voicemail without listening to it again, because the truth was, they had never given me everything. They had only taken, and taken, and taken. And now, for the first time in my life, I was free of them. Completely, irrevocably, free. The voicemail lingered in my mind long after I deleted it. My mother's voice, raw, desperate, laced with disbelief, was a sound I had never heard before. It should have made me feel something. Pity, guilt, some shred of regret for what I had done. But there was nothing, just silence, just the weight of my own freedom settling over me, unfamiliar and intoxicating. They had lost everything. The house, their standing, their carefully curated reputation. My father had retreated into himself, no longer the once proud man who commanded a room with his quiet authority. My mother, once draped in designer labels and an unshakable air of superiority, had been reduced to someone begging distant relatives for a couch to sleep on. And Thomas? Thomas was finished. His real estate empire had crumbled, his arrest plastered across local news outlets, his business reputation so thoroughly scorched that not even his old cronies would pick up his calls. I had burned their kingdom to the ground, and they knew it. Still, a part of me wasn't naive enough to believe that was the end of it. People like them don't just accept their downfall. They don't learn. They scheme. They fester. They look for the next thing to sink their teeth into, the next person to manipulate, the next lifeline to drain dry. And I had no intention of being that lifeline. 3 weeks after Thomas's arrest, I was walking back to my apartment from a late meeting when I spotted the car. Black, tinted windows, parked just across the street. It had been there the night before, and the night before that. I wasn't paranoid. I knew exactly who it was. I didn't hesitate. I didn't run. I simply walked up to the car, rapped my knuckles against the glass, and waited. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the faint hum of the city, the distant wail of a siren in the background. Then, slowly, the window rolled down. My mother sat in the driver's seat, her face gaunt, her once meticulously styled hair now dull and limp. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of her own choices had finally started pressing down on her, suffocating her. I tilted my head. Are you lost? She flinched, just slightly. Lindsay, what do you want? Her lips parted. But for once, she seemed at a loss for words. We need help. I let the words hang there, watching her shift uncomfortably under my silence. We need help. It took everything in me not to laugh. You don't deserve my help, I said evenly. You never did. She reached for something on the passenger seat, a thin manila folder. Your father, she swallowed, her voice breaking. He's sick, Lindsay. I didn't move. I didn't reach for the folder. Sick? Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. We don't have insurance anymore. We don't have savings. The house is gone. Thomas is. She exhaled shakily. We need you. Ah, there it was. The final card she had to play. Not manipulation. Not guilt. Desperation. She wasn't lying. I could see it in her eyes. My father was sick, and they had nothing left. But here's the thing about people like them, they don't change. Not really. Even now, sitting there in that car, stripped of every last ounce of dignity, she still wasn't apologizing. She wasn't admitting what they had done to me. She wasn't acknowledging the years of entitlement, the cruelty, the way they had used me until I had nothing left to give. She just wanted another handout, another safety net. I took a slow step forward, leaning down so we were eye level. You want me to save you? Her eyes were wide, hopeful. Yes, I smiled. I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember what it feels like to need something from someone who doesn't owe you a damn thing. Lindsay, because that's exactly how you made me feel for years. My voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now, sharp and unforgiving. Every time you dismissed me, every time you mocked my career, every time you took my money without so much as a thank you. This is what it feels like. Tears welled in her eyes, but I had no sympathy left to give. I straightened, adjusting my coat. Don't contact me again. I turned on my heel, walking away without looking back. She didn't call after me. She didn't try to stop me. Because for the first time in her life, my mother understood that she had lost. A month passed. I didn't hear from them again. Jason called me once, telling me my father had been admitted to a state hospital for treatment. My mother had finally found a distant cousin, willing to take her in on the condition that she found a job, which, to my knowledge, she had never done before in her entire life. Thomas was facing multiple charges, his real estate license permanently revoked, his assets liquidated to pay for legal fees. They were done. But me, I had never been freer. For the first time in my life, I wasn't weighed down by their expectations, their guilt trips, their endless demands. I had cut them out like a rotting limb, and instead of mourning, I had thrived. I moved into a new apartment, bigger than the last. Got a promotion, traveled, laughed more, slept better. I had chosen meself, and that was the greatest revenge of all. One evening, as I stood on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, my phone buzzed with a new message from Jason. Thought you'd like to know. Mom finally got a job, part-time at a grocery store. She's miserable. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back two simple words, poetic justice. I set my phone down, exhaling deeply, letting the last remnants of my past drift away with the evening breeze. They had spent years believing I was weak. They had no idea they had raised the very storm that would one day destroy them. And now I was untouchable. I should have known it wasn't over. People like them don't disappear quietly. They don't accept consequences. They don't learn from their mistakes. They adapt, twist reality, and claw their way back to the surface, leaving destruction in their wake. I had taken everything from them, left them gasping for air, and yet, somewhere deep down, I had always known they'd try to rise again. But I wasn't the same Lindsay anymore. This time, I was ready. It started with a single message. An unknown number. No name. Just 3 words. You'll regret this. I stared at the screen, feeling nothing. No fear, no panic. Just a slow, cold certainty settling in my bones. I didn't need to ask who it was. A week later, Jason called. They're trying to get back in. I leaned against my kitchen counter, stirring my coffee as I listened. Back in? They're reaching out to anyone who'll listen. Old friends, business connections, even the damn local paper. Jason sighed. They're spinning a new story now. Let me guess, I said dryly. The ungrateful daughter who ruined her own family? Worse, he muttered. Thomas is claiming you framed him. That you orchestrated everything to destroy him and steal the house out from under them. I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. And people actually believe that? Not many, Jason admitted. But a few. You know how they are. They'll lie, cheat, and manipulate until someone takes the bait. I took a slow sip of coffee, considering my next move. Let them talk, I said finally. They're grasping at straws. They have no power left. Jason hesitated. Maybe. But, Lindsay, they're desperate. And desperate people do stupid things. He wasn't wrong. 2 weeks later, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. A cold weight settled in my stomach. I knew I had locked it that morning. I never forgot. My fingers tightened around my keys as I stepped inside, heart pounding. The living room was untouched. The kitchen, the hall, everything looked exactly the same. But when I reached my bedroom, I stopped cold. Papers, scattered across the floor. My desk drawers were pulled open, contents rummaged through. My laptop was missing. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think, to breathe. There was only one person who would do this. My mother. She had always believed she was untouchable, that no matter what, she could cross lines and never face consequences. That I would always be there to catch her, to clean up her messes. Even now, reduced to nothing, she was trying to, take from me again. I wasn't that girl anymore. I called Jason first. She broke in. Silence. Then, a low curse. Jesus, Lindsay. Are you okay? I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. She took my laptop, went through my documents. Jason's voice darkened. She's looking for leverage. I know. You have everything backed up? I exhaled slowly. Yes. And I already know my next move. I didn't call her. I didn't chase her down. Instead, I went straight to the police. A breaking and entering report. A stolen laptop report. Everything documented, signed, sealed. And when the officer asked if I wanted to press charges, I looked him dead in the eye and said, yes. It wasn't about the laptop. It wasn't about the scattered papers or the invasion of privacy. It was about control, taking it back, once and for all. 2 days later, she was arrested. The phone rang at exactly 8:00 p.m. Jason's name flashed across the screen. I answered, already knowing what he was about to say. She's in holding, he confirmed. She used her one call to reach out to some distant cousin, begging for bail money. I leaned back on my couch, staring at the ceiling. And no one is helping her. The corner of my mouth twitched. Good. Jason hesitated. Are you okay? I thought about it. Thought about all the years of being used, of being manipulated, of being treated like I was nothing. Thought about the way she had called me a burden, while I had been the only thing keeping them afloat. Thought about how she had broken into my home, still believing she had the right to take from me. And now, she was sitting in a holding cell, alone, helpless, reduced to nothing but the weight of her own mistakes. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. Yeah, Jason, I murmured. I think I finally am. The next morning, I went about my life as if nothing had changed. Because, in truth, nothing had changed. My mother had always been this person. My family had always been this toxic. The only difference was that, this time, I wasn't cleaning up their mess. I wasn't their safety net. I wasn't theirs at all. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with another text from Jason. Looks like she's going to have to sit in there for a while. No one's posting bail. I stared at the message for a long time before finally responding. Let her rot. The silence after my last message, let her rot, was more satisfying than I had expected. For years, my mother had existed in a world where consequences were something that happened to their people. She could manipulate, guilt trip, and trample over anyone without ever facing the fallout. But this time, she had hit an immovable force, me, and I had made my choice. 3 days passed before Jason called again. I answered on the first ring. She's still in there, he said, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite name. No bail money, no lifelines left. I exhaled slowly, gripping my coffee mug. She hasn't called me? Jason hesitated. No, but she's been asking about you. I smirked. I bet. Lindsay, Jason said carefully, she's unraveling. You know how she gets when she doesn't have control. I did. I had spent my whole life watching her spin elaborate webs, twisting reality until even she believed her own lies. The second she lost her grip on a situation, she didn't just panic, she imploded. And now, sitting in a concrete cell, no allies left to save her, she must have been seething. She'll crack soon, Jason continued. I just thought you should know. I took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the warmth. Let me know when she does. It took 5 days. 5 days before my phone finally rang. A restricted number. I let it ring twice before answering. A familiar voice, ragged and strained, filled my ear. Lindsay. My mother. I leaned back against my chair, keeping my voice cool. Mom. A pause, then a shaky breath. I need your help. I could hear the effort it took for her to say those words. My whole life, she had made it abundantly clear that I was the one who needed her, never the other way around. But now, she had nothing, and I wasn't in a forgiving mood. I hummed, pretending to consider it. You need my help? Yes, her voice cracked. Lindsay, please. I I don't belong here. You don't understand what it's like. I tilted my head, amused. Oh, I think I do. Her breath hitched. I raised you, she tried again, her voice laced with desperation. I gave you everything. I laughed. A sharp, cold sound. Used me. And when I finally stopped letting you, you broke into my home like a common criminal. And now, you're exactly where you belong. Silence. Then, the final card she had left to play. Your father wouldn't have let this happen. I stiffened, the name hitting me like a blade between the ribs. She knew exactly what she was doing. My father had been a quiet man, flawed, but once loving. He had never fought for me, never stood against her, but in my childhood memories, he had been a source of stability before he had let her warp him into something cold. But now, he was gone, and she was using his memory as a weapon. I let the words sit for a moment before responding, my voice steady. My father is dead, Mom, just like the control you had over me. Her breath shuddered through the phone. I imagined her sitting on a hard bench, in a room that reeked of desperation and lost causes, realizing finally, that there was nothing left for her to take. You're really not going to help me? She whispered, disbelief lacing every syllable. I closed my eyes, let myself feel the weight of this moment. Then, I exhaled. No, Mom, I said softly. I'm really not. And then I hung up. 3 weeks later, Jason called me with the final update. She took a plea deal, he said. 6 months in county, plus a permanent record. I let out a slow breath. She actually took it? She didn't have a choice. Jason hesitated. She tried every trick in the book, playing the victim, blaming Thomas, even claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But in the end, nobody bought it. I stared out the window of my new apartment, watching the city stretch out before me. Nobody bought it. For the first time in my life, people were seeing her for what she really was. Good, I said finally. Jason sighed. You okay? I thought about it, really thought about it. I had spent years being through dutiful daughter, the financial safety net, the scapegoat. And now? Now I was free. I let the quiet settle in, let myself feel the absence of her voice, her demands, her endless need. And I realized something. I had never been better. Yeah, I murmured, a small smile tugging at my lips. I'm okay. 6 months later, my mother was released from jail. She didn't call me. She didn't text. Because she finally knew there was no point. I had won.